Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. It's been a couple of months since I've last recorded one, so apologies. It's been a bit of a break. I've been obviously busy with my new role and various other sort of personal projects I've got in the pipeline. This video, I've had a sort of a couple of requests over the past couple of weeks. This was regarding when you delete a record. How you kind of exclude that from a set of results. So, for example, on the account record, if I just go into the sales area and open an account, from a previous example, we'd put a counter on the form of the number of contacts. So, if you were to go and delete an associated contact, how would you obviously pick up the and sort of that deletion and update the counter accordingly? Because obviously there's a bit of a difference when you do a deletion that it doesn't actually, the message doesn't contain an entity, it contains an entity reference. So you wouldn't have the associated fields. So for example, I deleted that A Babington as primary contact. All you'd have passed through into the, as part of the message context, is just the entity reference. So it'd be the GUID, the logical name being the contact, and the name of the contact, so you wouldn't be able to tell which account this was associated to. So we're going to have a look at doing a fairly simple plugin that can do a record count on a link query or query expression, whatever your preference is, or fetch XML if you prefer. Look at how we can, and I'll probably be doing a link query, but how we can actually query the associated contacts and do a true count for this deletion. So obviously what we'll need to do, if we were to, we'll have to do it pre-operation so that the contact still exists in the database when we're querying, but we want to exclude the record that's about to be deleted from that result set. So what I'll do, I'll fire up Visual Studio. I have been using Visual Studio 2013 a little bit, but obviously there's a bit of a hack to get the developer toolkit to work. It does seem to work okay, but it's not officially supported yet. So I'll, for the sake of compatibility with everyone and not having to force people to do the modifications to various files and extractions of the installation package, I'll stick with Visual Studio 2012 for now. So if I open my CRM demo solution, obviously you can open your own solutions. That'll take a few seconds. So we've got a whole bunch of plugins in here from previous videos and a couple of workflows. There was a number of contacts associated plugin we did some time ago that was triggered on the update of that particular contact field. So what I've done is I've removed that from the register file to save any sort of conflicts, because we're going to be updating that field. I didn't want it to then trigger this other plugin, which would then cause obviously that to do its logic as well. So I'll close that plugin, the class library. So the typical way we've done this in the past is to open the CRM Explorer, which I've got docked on the left hand side, expand out your organization, and then expand your entities. This will be on the delete of a contact. So if I highlight contact, right click it and create plugin, we then need to fill in some details about the message type and so on. So this is going to be on a delete. We could also register a create, so that obviously the counter would then be recalculated when the new record's added to the database, and obviously the delete we're going to do when a contact's deleted from the database. So it's running in the context of the calling user. The pipeline stage, this is going to be quite important because we need to do this pre-operation. The reason for that is, as part of the logic, we're going to have to retrieve the current contact to see which account it's associated to. And if it was post-operation, obviously the retrieve would fail because the contact would no longer exist in the database. And then we're going to do a further query to retrieve all the associated contacts for that same account excluding the one that's about to be deleted, because obviously pre-operation it will still exist in the database. So if we were to query, it would obviously give you a false reading. It would be one higher than it should be because it hasn't yet been deleted. So for the purpose of the delete, it is important to do it pre-operation. Being a delete, there's no filtering attributes and so on. We don't need to do any kind of pre-image because this will be an entity reference that's passed in, so it wouldn't actually generate a image entity pre or post. Well, obviously post would be irrelevant for a pre-operation message. So that's then generated this Precontact delete class library. So you can see it inherits from the base plugin class. It's got the registered event, stage 20 being pre-operation, delete message, and then the contact entity. Now if we scroll a little bit further down, then we've got this new method, this execute precontact delete, that's based upon the name and obviously is called from within the base plugin class's execute method. So it's got a very simple bit of logic in it at the moment, which if the local context passing is null, it throws an exception, and then we can put our business logic beneath in this to-do area. What I will do is just deploy that first off. So if we need to add any new messages, because if we were to look under plugin assemblies, under the CRM demo plugins, which is my project, we won't see that pre-contact delete, even if I do a refresh, because it hasn't been deployed to the platform. So underneath plugin assemblies, if I expand that plugins out, we don't see the pre-contact delete. So if we do want to add a create message, which we can decide on in a minute, so I'll deploy that. So if I now refresh that CRM Explorer again, now this has been deployed to the platform, and I expand our assemblies again, we can now see our pre-contact delete with our delete step registered, and we should also be able to see that from the settings. I think mine's currently targeting this contact matching solution, but it'll be present in whatever solution you're targeting, so we should see the additional message processing step. So we're looking for pre-contact delete, there we go. So we got that extra step now registered, although there's absolutely no logic in there that does anything functional at the moment. So if we come back over to Visual Studio, either delete that to-do line or just start a new line beneath it. What we can do to start is, rather than having to reference things like the organization service and the plugin execution context via this local context property, I can create a new variable. So if I just do a shorthand, so we can just reference the context via the name of the variable called context, and we just set that equal to the local context dot plugin execution context. I mean, this is completely unnecessary. If you don't want to do this, you don't have to. It's just that referencing the context with that local context dot plugin execution context is quite a lot to type out, although you have the IntelliSense. Just makes it, I think, easier to read by just referencing it as context. Likewise, the organization service, we can do a shorthand version of that called service, and again we just set it to the pointer in memory that matches the local context organization service, so point to exactly the same reference type in memory, just as easier to read and to reference stuff using that shorthand version. So where we would typically do with things like a create and update, a test on the target object in the input parameters, whether it's present for starters and whether it's a entity type. Obviously this is going to be an entity reference because it's a delete message, so we can do similar tests, and we can put the tests in, because if we do register this on a create, we will need to know that the target object is of type entity and it's present. So I'll put those tests in, but we'll have to do additional logic to handle the delete. So before I do any further, if I create a late band type and initialize it with null, so then we can do our tests that if the context.input parameters contains an object called target with a capital T and it's of type context.input parameters, then we can reference the target object by putting it in the square bracket. So that's just saying the key called target within this input parameters collection, and we can do an isEntity, so it will return true if it is an entity type. So if that was true, we can set the entity late band type equal to the context input parameters target. Now there's two ways of doing this. We could cast it using entity in brackets beforehand, and that will cast that obviously object, which is an object type, which is and cast it to the entity type. Or we could say put as entity at the end. Both would work, the difference being if you did the brackets entity at the start and it wasn't a valid cast, it would throw an exception, whereas as entity, if it's a valid cast, it will return an entity into this reference type. Otherwise it would return null. So it's up to you to decide which one's going to be relevant, and whether if it returned a null, if it was going to be an issue. But obviously because we've already done this preceding test to check it's an entity, it's always going to cast correctly to the entity type, so you should never get a null, but just so it's aware of the differences between the two. So then we need to say, obviously, if it's a delete message, this won't be true, so we need some sort of else where we can now take the entity reference, or we can do a test on the message name first off. So if context.message name equals delete, then we can actually retrieve, because it's pre-operation, the contact that we're deleting will still exist in the database, so we can retrieve that contact record and obviously then take the properties from within it to look at what its parent account is. So we could do a contact, deleted contact equals, and then we can take do a service.retrieve. Service.retrieve. The entity name is obviously contact, and obviously because we've got an early band class library from quite a while back, obviously nothing's changed in terms of attributes and so on. So that early band class is still relevant. So we can do contact.entity logical name, or you could put speech marks and contact all lowercase, whichever suits you. Obviously I prefer to have the strongly typed with IntelliSense, but again both work perfectly fine. The GUID is obviously going to be the context, obviously the input parameters will contain this target, but it will be entity reference. So actually what we do need to do is we'll just create an entity reference type, or I'll just call it entity ref, and we'll cast the same as we would normally do with this as entity here. We'll do the same with we'll copy that, but instead of being entity at the end, we can do entity reference. So on the delete message, because the target will be an entity reference, it will cast it into this entity ref variable, which you can then take the ID, entity ref dot ID. Now in terms of the column sets, it's entirely up to you whether you limit this. I mean, you're retrieving a single record here, so if we did column set true, yes, you are retrieving a lot of unnecessary columns, but I don't envisage it's going to be a massive performance impact. It's only a single record, so in this instance we will do new column set and true. Obviously I'm going to get whinged at because I haven't added the namespace above for the xrm.sdk.query, so under here you can either type it out, or if you right click on it, it should resolve. So if you hover over resolve, it should be able to add the using statement for you. So just click on that, and above in that area it should have it's put that extra namespace in. So now we've got access to things like the column sets. Now the reason that's whingy, obviously I haven't closed the statement, but also the retrieve returns an entity type, which is a late bound type. I mean, this is an early bound type that inherits from it. So again, we could either put brackets and entity, or use the brackets and contact, or use the toEntity method, which is a generic method which you can put in those less than and greater than, and that will convert the entity type to a contact type. So what we've done there, we've set these variables up, which is just a shorthand version, created a late bound entity reference type, done a check as to whether the input parameter contains an object called target, and if it's of type entity, if it is, cast that target object to the entity variable. Because this is a delete, it'll contain a object called target, but it won't be an entity, so it'll fall into this else block. Then we're checking if the message name is delete. If it is, we're creating a new entity reference and casting that input parameter target object as an entity reference, which, because we're pre-operation, the contact will still exist in the database. So we're doing a service.retrieve on the contact entity. With that GUID of the record that's being deleted, we're retrieving all columns, and then we cast it to this using the toEntity method to an early bound contact type. And we could say if it's not the delete method, then return. So if that's not true, and then it's not the delete message, it will exit the plugin. So now we've got the deleted contact in memory. We need to look at what or if it has got a parent account to update the counter. So one of the first things we could check for is if deleted contact, I'll need to set this outside. The contact deleted contact will only exist inside the scope of this if block. So we probably should just do contact deleted contact equals null, and then I can remove the contact from the front. So all it's going to do is set a value into deleted contact. So if deleted contact dot parent customer ID, so we're checking to see if the contact that's being deleted has a parent customer, parent account. So if it doesn't, obviously there's no point to updating a counter, because there's nothing to actually update, because we were going to update the account record that it's associated to. So if that's not equal to null, and possibly because that customer field could be contacts or accounts, we should probably do a check to see that it's the right type. So parent customer ID dot logical name equals account dot entity logical name. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense, that doing a check to make sure the field for the parent customer is not empty, and if it's not empty, is the target entity type of that customer field the account entity. Because if it was the contact, we haven't got account, we're not doing a count on the contact record or entity, so obviously we wouldn't do this piece of logic. So what we need to do now is we'll do a using statement to create our CRM demo context, which is our organization service context, which we can use to access the link provider. So we can do link queries, which I find easier and shorter to write than to do query expressions. Some of you guys, I think, prefer fetch XML, but it's whatever is your preference, really. So just call it org context equals new CRM demo context, pass it in our shorthand service, organization service reference, and then do the two curly braces. The reason I do it in a using statement, I've explained before a little bit, just so that the context can be tracking a large number of records and can use quite a bit of memory up. And the point of the using statement is obviously the object you're referring to, the type you're referring to, has to implement the iDisposable interface. And what it means is that as soon as it falls out of scope of this using statement, this org context, the memory will be released immediately. Because obviously if you were tracking a lot of records, although I don't know how quickly it gets garbage collected, it might only be a fraction of a second in terms of computing time and so on. I just think it's a bit cleaner to use the using statement, therefore you guarantee that the context gets disposed of immediately when it falls out of scope. So we also need to then add, if we're going to do a link query up in our using areas, whether you do it at the end or it doesn't really matter. So if I do system.link, otherwise we just get complaining with the IntelliSense. So now we'll do a var contacts or something like that, and then from C or whatever you want to put, doesn't really matter, in org context dot contact set. So what we're going to do now is retrieve all the contacts that are related to the same parent customer record, but we need to delete this. Obviously this record that we're about to delete is because it's pre-operation, still exists in the database, so we need to exclude that from the results, so that otherwise we'd have it would be inaccurate by 1. So from C in all context set where the parent customer ID is equal to the parent customer ID of the record we're about to delete, and the ID of the contact is not equal to, so we could either use the entity reference of the record we're about to and use the ID of that, or we've cast it to this early bound type, so both would work the same way. Deleted contact.id, and then we can either do a select C and that will retrieve every single field for all these contacts, or we could restrict it down to a single field. I mean, we're going to just do it. We're going to convert this result set into a list and do a count of the list anyway. But I guess if there were thousands of contacts, for the sake of performance and for reducing the memory footprint, we should restrict the fields it does retrieve. So if we did a new contact, and then we can just say the ID, we'll just retrieve the GUID. So all that's going to retrieve back for these contacts is just the GUID, and set this new contact record's ID to equal just the ID field from the retrieved record. We could do the to list and the dot count and surround surround all of that in parentheses or minus the semicolon. But for the sake of clarity, just so you can see what I'm doing, I'll do it on a new line. So then we could say int total contacts equals contacts to list dot count. I think if you try and do the dot count link extension method instead of the to list, you do just count brackets. I don't think it usually works with CRM, so I find it easy just to create a list on the fly and then do a count, and then we'll have an integer value of the total number of contacts retrieved. And we then need to set the parent account, that field, so we can do an early band type account update account or something like that equals service.retrieve. It's the account entity. The GUID will obviously be the deleted contact, parent customer ID, and then the ID of it. And then in terms of columns we want to retrieve, we only really want to retrieve the total contacts field. So if I go back to my sales accounts, open one of these, so this field, we only really want to retrieve that. So if I bring up the form designer and double click the field name and go to the details tab, when it finishes loading, so number of contacts, double click it. So my servers looks a bit slow performing. Click the details, so this FSO underscore number of contacts. So minimize that, so I can say new column set, rather than the true in brackets, we'll do a new string array, which is the square brackets after strings, that just indicates it's an array. The curly braces, and within that we can put our FSO underscore number of contacts, and then close that, and then we need to obviously cast this again using the toEntity method to an early bound account type. Just shrink that down a bit. So I'll just go to the start of the line so we can scroll across. So we're creating a new early bound reference type called update account. We're using the standard retrieve method, targeting the account entity where the parent customer ID, so that's the parent account, and then we're just retrieving a single field for the number of contacts field, and then we use the toEntity method to cast it to this early bound type. And then on a new line we can then set that update account.fso number of contacts equal to the total contacts we calculated just above. And then we can do a straight service.update and pass it that update account. And that should complete our logic for a delete. Obviously if it's a create, we'd have to do slightly different logic. Possibly this block of code, we'd have to do tests on the message type beforehand. So if it was a delete, do this, because obviously you wouldn't exclude the current record for a create. In fact, what you'd probably do for a create is do it post operation. You wouldn't need to exclude any records because the new one that's been created has been committed to the database. So you just do a straight link query for the same parent customer ID and update accordingly. So if I deploy that now, so we've now deployed that. So if I go to our demo account, we can look at the associated contacts. I think this one's got a lot of contacts, so it might be worth me just reducing the number. Yeah, this is one that's got, I think, 17,000. I'll pick another account off the list. So if I just take this test account, see what contacts this has got associated. Contacts. So this has got nobody. So if I go to the contacts list, I'll just pick a few off the top of the list. So if I pick the first 4, I'll bulk edit them and set the parent account from their currently CRM demo account. And if I go on blind, company name, . have to do them individually. Let me just open a Babington. So if I clear that and set it to test account, so that's one of them. I don't know why the bulk edit won't let me change them, but so I've changed test account, this A Babington to test account. I'll do one more and I'll create a new one. So delete that test account. So that's 2 associated. Yeah, I mean, I won't create a new one. I don't mind this data's not valuable, so I'll take that A Barnett. So this is the 3rd one we're going to be associated. So if I again delete that, pick the account, save. So now if I go to this test account and look at the contacts associated and refresh that, we've got 3 people associated. So if I now, obviously the account itself, because there's no create or update registered on its, so open test account again. So you can see the number of contacts doesn't contain anything because we haven't got any of the plugins or any of the messages registered for the current plugin, that on a create or an update of an existing contact it doesn't do the query. But if I delete one of the 3, so if I open A Babington, or actually let's go to A Barnett. Sorry, let me just go back. So if I take this A Barnett and delete from up here, this should now trigger our logic. Which should load our plugin and should update the, so that's deleted. We've got 2 remaining. So if I go back to the front page, we can now see it did it pre-operation, looked up. If we look back at the code, it would have retrieved the current record we're about to delete, found the parent customer ID, used that in our link statement to retrieve the other associated contacts, but excluding the one that still existed, which was A Barnett, and then calculated the total count and updated the account accordingly. So if I go back to test account and I'll go back to the contacts list and I'll just associate one more. Well, I'll put I'll just delete another one, so it should drop down to 1. So test account and look at the contacts list. We'll open A Barnard or Barnard, and again should be a little bit quicker this time when I click at delete and OK. So he's gone, and now the test account main form, we've now got 1 contact associated. So what you would probably want to do is look at doing a create step and an update step, where if the parent customer field is updated on a contact, it will equally trigger this logic, and you'd probably have to surround this section with an if condition to test for the message name. So then if it was a update or a create, you could do a piece of logic that didn't have obviously any exclusions in the ID, and if it was the other 2, the create or update, it would just obviously retrieve all associated. Probably post operation would be the best bet, and then that would give you your correct, accurate counter. So that completes this video. I'm going to try and get another couple up this week, because obviously I've been a bit lax of late with I think it's been almost 2 months to the day since I last posted a video, so apologies. But thanks again for watching, and any requests and so on, feel free to post them. Obviously, if they're more complicated, it does take longer to sort of create the material, because typically if it's quite complex, I tend to have to do a little bit of work before I record the video. Otherwise, it would be hours and hours long, which I've got no issue doing, and you can see the whole process. But it's just the time it takes to upload and prepare the actual video. If it's 3 or 4 hours, it takes a long time to edit, and obviously even longer to upload. But thanks for watching, and speak to you soon, and see you soon. Cheers.